Hi, everyone. Welcome to the reprise of the History in Color event. We first presented this event on Bookstore Romance Day in August, and the conversation barely got started before we had to call time. So I am so grateful to all of our authors today for being able to join us to continue that conversation and expand upon it. Everyone who has registered for this event will be entered to win one of several fabulous prizes. The event is being recorded and the video will be emailed to everyone who registered, as well as posted to our YouTube channel. So now I would like to introduce you to your moderator for this afternoon, Ms. Kathy Burnett of the Brainlair Books in South Bend, Indiana. Take it away, Kathy.
You're mute.
Think I would know not to be muted and speak on Zoom. For 3 years we've done this, and I still do that same thing. I'm Kathy. I'm Brainlair Books in South Bend, Indiana. We are a children's bookstore focused primarily on Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ, disabilities. We look for books by and about those audiences. We hope to find books that meet that intersection, but we do what we can with that. And I'm so grateful to be here tonight with these wonderful authors. I've had the opportunity to read each of their books, and if you haven't, you need to go out and do that right as soon as we're done. Don't do it right now, wait till we're done. But I was just introduced to so many new things, and I have a lot to ask you. Audience, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. We'll make sure we have time to get to those at the end. And I want to go through and have each person introduce themselves and tell us about the latest book that we will be talking about today. And if we could start with Beverly Jenkins, the godmother of historical romance, take it away.
Hi, I'm Beverly Jenkins. My latest book came out this summer, How to Catch a Raven. It's about a woman who's a grifter who has to try and find a stolen copy of the Declaration of Independence. And the guy is like, why am I even in this story? But it's a good book, so go out and buy
it. Vanessa, I'm going through how we have it laid out. I'm just going to go that way.
Excellent, because everybody's screen is different. But hi, I'm Vanessa Riley. I write Regency fiction. So I write historical fiction, I write historical romance, and historical mystery. My last historical romance was the wrap-up of the Rogues and Remarkable Women series with fabulous titles that should stick in your brain, like A Duke, The Lady, and a Baby, An Earl, The Girl, and a Toddler, and A Duke, The Spy, an Artist, and a Lie. I did it! I did
it! Diana?
I'm Diana Quincy. I write historical romance. Regency up until now. My new series, which I'm still writing, is going to be Victorian. My most recent book is The Marquis Makes His Move. And it's about a half Arab Marquis who goes, his mother is an Arab immigrant, and his father was a Marquis, an English Marquis, and he goes undercover as a footman in the home of a map maker because he thinks she's written a map that has cheated him out of his land.
Whoa.
Amelie?
Hey everybody, I'm Amelie Howard. I also write historical romance in the Victorian and Regency era, as well as young adult. My last book, which came out in November, was The Duke in Question. It's about spies and, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, a girl who basically wants to make a difference, make some change in her life, and decides to go across the Atlantic to carry some letters that are highly suspicious, and she's chased by a spy master who she's had a crush on her entire life, and then things kind of explode in the best kind of way. And my next book is Queen Bee, which we'll be talking about today, and this is The Count of Monte Cristo meets Bridgerton. It's young adult. This comes out in April.
Jeannie?
I love hearing about all these adventure stories. I like adventure historicals. I'm Jeannie Lynn, and I write historical romance and mysteries, historical mystery, as well as dabbling a little fantasy and steampunk. And primarily, I've written primarily in Imperial China, the Tang Dynasty and the Qing Dynasty, and I am branching out to finally write about Vietnamese historicals as well. And my most recent book was, I had to quickly, luckily I had this within arm's reach because I forgot to be prepared like everyone else is, Red Blossom in Snow. And it is set in the Tang Dynasty, and it's a mystery involving a magistrate and a courtesan in the Lotus Palace pleasure quarter world that this is based on. And it's actual historical area where courtesans would mix with politicians and bureaucrats and more powerful men, and sort of the culture that surrounds that. And so there's hidden pasts and all sorts of angst in that one.
And Liana, is it Liana? I'm sorry, Liana.
Yes, Liana. I'm Liana de la Rosa, and I write historical romance too. My historical romances are set late Regency and Victorian era, and my upcoming book is coming out in April, and it's Ana Maria and the Fox. It's the first book in my Latinx Victorian series, and I've been wanting to write a Latinx historical forever. And I'm so excited. I've had the opportunity to do that with this series. It follows three sisters, the Luna sisters, who flee Mexico when the French invade in the 1860s, and they flee to London and proceed to take London society by storm. So this comes out April 4th.
All right, that was fantastic. So right off the bat, each of you talked about your novels differently. We had Regency, we heard historical, we heard Victorian. Who can start by explaining to the people, like, what are the differences between those kinds of things? I'm thinking they're all historical, but then we have these delineations. How do you decide what that means for you and what that does to your writing? Talk a little bit about that, please. Let's start with as she takes a big drink. You're first.
We can't hear you. Sorry, you dropped out.
Liana, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. I missed the part where you said that. So usually, like, for instance, I write in the Victorian era, so I'm writing under the reign of Queen Victoria, but also at this, if you want to get really technical, that's just as it relates to the Western world or what was happening in England during the time. Obviously, if you're in Mexico, you would call it a different era, right? It would be the French occupation. But the Regency is usually, I want to say the late 1700s through like technically 1820, would you say, when King George,
I think it's like 1810, right?
It's
1810?
1811.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
1811 to 1820 is the technical Regency.
Yeah,
with-
very short. Yeah.
Yes.
yeah,
But globally, they go back to anywhere from 1780 to 1830 and count that as the Regency.
And then Victorian is 1837 to 1901. And I sound smart because I just looked that up. Not like Vanessa, who knew that off the top of her head.
and then you can be like you can talk about the Victorian era, like what was happening in the beginning of the Victorian era is very different than what was happening at the end of the Victorian era. You have the Gilded Age. History is full of different things. And then Miss Bev writes Westerns, so totally different continent.
Yep.
How do you decide? Like, does the publisher decide where you're going to place this novel and what you're going to do, or do you bring this to them? How does that work?
I'll take this one. You're a nerd, right? That's how it all starts. You are a nerd.
She's not
And
wrong.
you are digging through history. And if you're Beverly, you're gonna find somebody with a bottle of hot sauce in the middle of nowhere in the 1800s, and all of a sudden a story comes into your head of like, well, how did the hot sauce get here?
Yeah.
And you'll come up with something, and the next thing you know, it's a romance and heat and fun and excitement, and that's how you get a Beverly Jenkins novel. For me, I will find some crazy nugget, just not hot sauce, might be some form of tea or something like this, or some sort of spice. And then I will think, well, how does that bring the West Indies? Because I write about West Indian heroines coming, that whole diaspora, they were, brought to England or Scotland or Ireland for education, for marriages. And what does that look like? And what does that look like as a person of color trying to integrate these typically white spaces? For me, it's always going to be that Regency Georgian era, because I love that period. I grew up on that period. And, my father used to tell me all these crazy stories, half are true, about West Indies and the Caribbean. And that, to me, that finds the home. And that's how I write these stories.
Jeannie.
I'm sorry. I was like, if you saw me, I was yelling at someone who's decided to make like elephant noises. For some reason, they were quiet all night, all evening until now. And there's like elephant noises out there. You may hear them again. I have twins there. I think that it was really interesting, Kathy. You said, like, does the publisher decide? And I think that's a good time to kind of bring up this and Vanessa was saying she writes in the West Indies, right? And if you're writing, if you fall in love with a time period that is not well known, that is not on the publisher's map yet, I think that you have to, one, become a total nerd, fan, geek, scholar. You have to be everything for that time period, and kind of convince the publisher, convince the readership as well, that this is where you want to read your next romance. This is where you next want to time travel. And that was sort of me in the Tang Dynasty. I fell in love with the era. I wanted an era where women had some degree of independence, but I love playing with power dynamics. The Tang Dynasty is like 300 years, so it's not 10 years like Regency, it's like 300 years span. But there were a lot of stories there that I felt like I felt it was perfect for historical romance. Other people thought I was off my rocker, but I thought it was perfect. I thought the stories that I loved from that era were perfect for becoming historical romances, and that's what got me going on it.
I mean, for me, I'm lazy, and I will say that out loud. So if I do a lot of research, which I do love, in one era, I'm going to write as many books as I can in that era before I get sick of it, because I know what's going on. I know the main people of the time. I know places. I've researched maps, customs, social happenings, all this stuff I've done. So it's kind of like already in the back of my head. So when I'm writing the book, I don't have to go check every single thing of research, because I do like to have some kind of authenticity, some layer of that in the story, even though it's fiction and, we have creative liberties and whatnot. And same thing with the Victorian era. If I want to write that, I already know about, who was the monarch, what did, the society look like. And then, in one of the last books I've written, I'm on the edge of the Victorian era, and they're in New York, and I'm like, oh, the Gilded Age, let me go research this. So maybe that's going to be my jump, right? Maybe, if it's not too hard, because again, I'm lazy.
So for me, I started writing, my gateway to romance was Regency. So when I started writing it, I started writing Regency. And that was fine when in my first several books, the characters were white, because I thought you had to write white characters, and you really did back then, and to sell. And then when I decided I really wanted to write Arab characters that reflected my own heritage, which you don't see in the literature unless they're the bad guys or the terrorists or the repressed woman. So I wanted to really introduce those characters, and I wanted to do it in a period, an era that was familiar to the reader. So I wasn't introducing too many things that were unusual. My new series, which also features Arab American heroines who go to England and inherit a castle. In this case, I moved them up to the Victorian age, and it was my first Victorian age, because there wasn't a lot of research on Arabs in England around the Regency times. And it's certainly not in English, and I don't read Arabic. And I searched, and I went to professors, and it was and it was hard to find. But I do read English, and there's the literature on Arab Americans started becoming available around 1880, 1870. And that's why, I mean, this is one of the books, The Early Immigrant Arab Experience. It's juxtaposed, but anyway. And it starts around 1870, 1880. There was a lot more research that I could have so I could ground the story in some reality, which is why I went to the Victorian age.
I would agree with that.
Mine, so my series, my Luna Sister series started because I was researching immigration records for a side character in another like novella. And I came across records for Mexicans immigrating to the UK. And I was like, why would they be doing that at that time? And then it came to me, oh, that's right, the French occupation. And it just, I fell down this wormhole of just research. And I was like, I wonder if I could make this work, because I've had other like series ideas with diverse characters, and they've never been picked up. It was never right, or the right time, or whatever. So I just knew that this one, especially as a Mexican American, like it was really special to me, and I really wanted it to work. But there's a lot of research that went into at least the proposal. And then I don't know about any of you, but I was like, I'm not writing this book if no one's going to buy it, because then it'll break my heart, because I know that this is like my people's story. Like it was really important to me, and I just didn't want to like put it all out on the page and it not go anywhere. And I was very lucky that it was bought so that I could just pour all that like history I found. But like you, Diana, a lot of my sources were in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish. So it was really difficult to find. I had to work with my mom a lot to get her to help me.
But that time is so cool, that whole period, because it's like Cinco de Mayo is from that, the Battle of Puebla and all that. So interesting.
Yeah, it was just a matter of like tying it together. But yeah, it all started just because I was like, looking at immigration records, just messing around, see what was out there.
Cool.
Love all of that. I wrote down a lot of things as you guys were talking, because just like it did in the first event that you did, research comes up a lot. And I think that's where that's where you guys probably ran out of time. You're talking about research and what that means, not just as a regular researcher, but also as a researcher of color, and how you're trying to bring yourself on the page, basically, so that other people who are like you can see themselves. I mean, that's kind of what we look for when we're looking for a book. We look for what we call own voices. And if I can find people telling their own story, that's the book I want to have in my store, because I feel like that's way more important to me. But like Diana mentioned, you didn't see that, right? You don't see that a lot. What you see is you didn't know, and this is what like a lot of people of color, I see their earlier work, they didn't know they could write about themselves. And Chimamanda Adichie has a TED Talk, and this is how I got into doing this kind of work. She had a TED Talk about the dangers of a single story, about not thinking she could write about herself because she'd never read a book about herself. When did you decide, each of you, that it's okay to write about you? When did you say, I'm done, I'm going to write about people like me, or people who I want to see in these books?
Right out the box.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I was too new to know any better, to know that I couldn't do it.
Right out the box, yeah.
And Ms. Bev was before me, but just by a little bit. But yeah, I didn't know any better, and I think that if I had known better, I would have been too afraid. And I think that I don't know if I would have gotten published doing something else. I just don't know, because that's the path that I took. But when I wrote my first book, I have to do a shout out. That's why I wanted to do a shout out. It's just someone who's not here, but Jade Lee was writing stories in China with Chinese characters and Asian characters, like it, and not, full on Asian culture, but with Caucasians, because it was the colonial, the 1800s, where Victorian, I think, era was actually where it was, where the colonialism and Europeans in China and Hong Kong and Shanghai and things like that. But when I read, like, I was of historical romance. And when I picked up one of her books, I was like, oh my gosh, you can do that. And I didn't realize that she was one of the only people doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it was just because I didn't know any better. That's what I did.
I just refused to. I mean, it never even crossed my mind to write white characters. I mean, even when I was little and doing, those terrible what they call now fanfics that, you wrote when you were 12 and 13 and 14, and you go back and you go, oh my God, this is terrible. It never occurred to me to write white characters, but it's a different time now. So, and it's a good thing.
And almost there's like a wave of fear that rolled in after they let a few people through. And literally when they let Brenda and Beverly through, there's been a wave of fear of not allowing these stories. My very first book, Madeline's Protector, got the most horrible rejection known to mankind from the top agent in romance at the time, who said, something to the effect of, I've worked with people like you never get it. And you need, you got great ideas, so get you a co-writer and you'll see. So I actually whitewashed my first book because I was determined to prove that I could write in this genre and I could get published. And I did it in Madeline's Protector. I think the closest adjacency to any color in that book was Madeline. She was of Spanish descent to explain her darker complexion. Okay. But after that book, I felt so sick. I proved I could get a contract, I could do it, but it wasn't the books of my heart. And literally, I wrote a novel. My agent was trying to shop stories, and we were getting, color had started coming back into these little discussions. And I wrote a novella where it was just unvarnished. Let's just do it. It was called A Bargain. And then I saw this lady over here. She was holding court. And she actually had bought a copy of this novella. And she told me to slow down and tell my story. After that day, I have never had the fear I had before. I wrote the stories of my heart because, sometimes you need that voice to go against all the ones you've put in your head saying you can't. And so I love hearing Ginny's story. She didn't know better, right? She just wrote the story. Those of us who think we know better have actually got the no's and the negatives all packed up in here. Or we've heard foolishness of, well, we got Miss Beverly. We don't need another story. Or they ain't want no Black people in the Regency. What you talking about? We don't care about all them facts you got. That's the way the stories are. All these negatives we put in our heads. So I'm so happy that now we have independent publishing, because I went indie because there was no's on this. My agent got some of the best rejections in the world, trying to shop diverse Black regencies, you name it. We got the battle scars. But once we went indie, that audience that I believe wanted to see these types of stories was there, right. And it picked them up. And then lo and behold, traditional started knocking back on your door. Hey, Vanessa, I see you. I see what you're doing over there. Wouldn't you like to write for us? So I say all that is we stop ourselves more than anybody else.
Yeah.
And we're not willing to take the risk of rejection. So we don't do it. We do the norms. And sometimes being the first is hard. Sometimes being the third is hard. Sometimes being the fifth is hard. Sometimes being the 22nd is hard. But you've got to tell your story is uniquely yours. You've got to tell it, and tell it to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just jumping on what Vanessa said. Like, identity is a super complex thing, right? And you have this amazing panel of authors, and everyone is from somewhere different. Lived experience is completely different. I grew up in the Caribbean, ended up coming to the US when I was 17, went to a predominantly white school, had no idea who I was at all. I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. There was no community. I felt very alone. So when I started writing, like a lot of what I read as a child, which were predominantly white books, informed my stories. And in 2012, similar to Vanessa, like that type of rejection, I had a book about Hindu mythology that went out to some of it was the big six at the time, small, small, small. And one of the acquiring editors said it was too exotic. I mean, to be told that your culture and what your lived experience is too exotic was a hard pill to swallow. So I thought that I had to write in a certain lane to be successful. And Diana, you said that earlier. And I mean, that book eventually got published by Skyhorse, which is, a medium-sized, very small publisher. They weren't mainstream, but I was very grateful that my editor was able to see something in the book to publish it. But that was also right before that giant wave of diversity in YA that took off, right? So I kind of always felt like I was behind the 8 ball a little bit. And then with historical, same, we were talking about reading something, a bit of research. So Sophia Duleep Singh was a brown Sikh princess in Victoria's court. And, she dealt with a lot of racism, but she was also like outranked half of these people. And I was so interested in her story. And then also like the Rani of Jhansi, who's like an Indian queen who like was riding into battle with an infant strapped to her back. And you have all these women in the UK that are like, they're stuck in these little narrow pigeonholes that they've been put in. And you have these women in other parts of the world that are so dynamic and courageous and incredible. So that made me kind of want to push to write those stories, in my current series. So I think like identity wise, and I'm kind of rambling, but like I read an article where somebody said that, identity is like living in a many roomed mansion, and one story can never carry the weight of all representation just because lived experience is so wide, it's so broad. So
I didn't even think to write Arab characters when we started. I think, I grew up in America and you tried to fit in. And I think the word for that now is code switching, right? You didn't have a word back then.
Right.
So it didn't even occur to me to write Arab characters. It wasn't like a decision I made. It was like, I want to write Regency. They're white. Let's write them. But after the publishing house that I was the one before Avon, they closed their line, Love Swept. And so a fellow author went to her editor at Avon and said, you really have to get Diana Quincy. For me, I was already thinking, I was kind of bored writing romance. And I was thinking I was going to try. I had already written some mysteries and I really enjoyed that. And I wanted to I was tired of writing white characters in the Regency. So when this editor emailed my agent came to me and I said, the only way I want to write romance, continue to write historical romance, is if I can introduce Arab characters, ethnic characters. And so when the editor asked for a proposal from me, I had only ever written white characters. So it was, I guess, a gamble, but I didn't care. I didn't want to, I was too bored really to just keep in the direction I was going. And luckily, the editor, my editor at Avon, Carrie Farron, was very into the idea of my writing these ethnic characters and has been extraordinarily supportive. So it all worked out. But honestly, it wasn't like a decision. It just, I've been so, what's the word? I've been so culturized. That's the wrong word. Vanessa, come on, you're
colonization. That's the effects of
I've been so
colonization.
colonized, but that's not the word. I mean, the word is I've been so indoctrinated
Right, there you go.
in this mainstream white
There you
culture.
go.
It didn't even occur to me. And I pass, so to speak. So I could mingle in that. So it didn't even occur to me to write Arab characters, which is really quite sad when you think about it.
My first series featured predominantly white characters, but it had diverse side characters and some main characters, because I always hoped that this was like a stepping stone, because like Diana, like Amelie, I was well aware of how white, Regency Victorian historical romance was. So for me, when I started, I was like, okay, I'm willing to play the game and hopefully develop a readership. And then hopefully I can have that readership when I actually want to do something else, that they might be willing to like let me do something else, because I've proven, okay, she can write a book, people are reading this book, whatever. So before I came up with this Latinx series, I had pitched other series. I had one with Victorian mountain climbers in the Himalayas. Oh my gosh, I cannot even tell you how much I love that series. Love it. One day I'm going to find a home for it. It was so fun to write. It was just diverse characters from all over the world, and they're climbing mountains, and it was fantastic. And it got a lot of great feedback, but didn't go anywhere. So then I started playing with ideas of doing like Gilded Age, but I didn't want to do like in the ballrooms, like Fifth Avenue. Like I wanted it to be in like tenements and like more gritty, and that didn't go anywhere. And I remember talking with my agent, like I want to write, but I want to do something fun and a little different, and I want it to feel more real for me. Like if I'm going to continue to do this. And we talked a lot about what was selling. And she's like, ballrooms, romps are selling. Like this it was right before Bridgerton came out. And she's like, those are what's selling. And I'm like, I don't want to write that. I've been writing that. Like, I want to do something different. And she goes, well, then make it your own. How could you make it your own? And that's when I happened to find out, had this kind of like nugget about my Mexican heroines coming over, and just, it's in a ballroom, the story's in ballrooms and in London, but the politics, the world is so much bigger, more exciting. And it's just been a lot of fun. And I'm really glad that I've had an opportunity to finally write it, like to go there. But yeah.
Vanessa, you mentioned doing indie publishing, and I think, Jeannie, I think you had one of the books I looked for you was indie published as well. How does that work? I know there's that one person who was indie published, and now that person's traditionally published and on every bestseller list, and we all know bestseller doesn't mean it's the best book. It just means that everybody's selling the same book over and over. At least that's how I feel about it, being in the book industry. It's never the best book. It's the one who got the most marketing, right? And that's always been the case with diverse books. They didn't sell because they wasn't putting the marketing behind them. They weren't like making them available to people. And it's always been like a big thing for me being in this. Like, how do you decide where you're going to take these books so that it can get out there?
Well, I think that's definitely a reality, is that, and this is true, like, it's easy to say like, oh, well, if publishers aren't buying your historical, that's people of color, characters of color, and a diverse setting, then just indie publish it. That's like very easy to say, but the truth is that the reality is it's a tough market out there for indie publishers to get footing, right? Because there's just as much, if not more, of a flood of other books out there, and so it really is hard to get noticed. I started indie publishing basically when my publisher at the time sort of pulled print on one of my books and said it wasn't selling or whatnot. It wasn't, and it's true. I always knew that my books, you could put any Regency up and make more money than my titles, and so they were there for, I'm afraid to say, a little bit of tokenism. But I think they also took a chance. So both, right? Both those things can be true. And then I've been indie publishing since, in the same series. And I think it's not much of a decision for me for like, oh, am I going to indie publish this or not? That's the only way that I had to continue with this and sort of take control over how to market the series and things like that. I think one of the things that's been great in terms of indie publishing, though, is I could market it in ways that when didn't care to or didn't want to market the books. So I could reach audiences that Harlequin wasn't reaching for. So you could be creative about that. And also, because you love the book, you can put it in, you put a little bit more behind it. The latest book, this was just an Reprise, but Red Blossom and Snow hit like a New York Times notable book list, notable books of 2022 list. And I just, through luck, through knowing someone who liked the book. All it takes is one person to like the book, and that person to be someone who has a pen and wants to talk about it. But really, my books really struggle to get marketing. Indie books do struggle to get this type of distribution and marketing that you might get through a publisher. And so that person who hit the list and is now selling everywhere, that was not me.
You just need Kylie Jenner to put an Instagram post.
I know, right?
Book and that might make a difference.
Lord have mercy.
For me, I took a gamble. I did a novella. This is compiled. This is the whole series, because as Miss Brev was telling me to write longer. I took a chance because people said these faces on covers didn't sell. And I put it out there, and without any marketing, because I spent all my money on getting the cover done and editing and whatnot. It was like 1,000 copies sold in like a week. And that was with no marketing. It was just this, I wouldn't say broke the internet, but it put a good dent in, and people sharing it and saying this is something different, something new. So sometimes you just have to take a risk. But like Jenny says, it's a crapshoot out here. There's millions and millions of books. You can get on TikTok and hopefully you can do that viral dance and bring something to the party, or do an Instagram post, or it's a crapshoot. But lightning does strike, and when it happens, God bless any other lightning strikes and it happens, because this is a very, very tough business. That's why you have to write the books of your heart. So
Right.
Come hell or high water, if it hit the New York Times, or if it hits the low times, you're still good, because you are putting out the books that you want to put out.
Yeah.
Really
It's a hard
good
line
question.
though,
Sorry.
right? I mean, are all of you full-time authors?
Yeah.
We get both.
Are we what? Say it
Full
again.
time.
Yeah.
Full-time authors.
Yeah. Well, only because I'm at home. But you start out with, for me, a job and a husband and kids and working, and I wound up working in the basement at night, because that's the time that you try and carve out of your life in order to be able to do it. And then a lot of us don't make enough money to be able to walk away from that 9 to 5 and write full time. So you can be a full-time writer but not be a full-time writer. So the both things can be true.
Yeah, I have a full-time job that gets me my insurance and health insurance and
Exactly.
retirement and pays the
I have
bill-
a full-time
pays most of the
spouse
bill.
that gets me those things.
Yep.
Yeah.
I am a kept woman. I will admit it. I mean, look, we all started out, like you said, Bev, like, you start out early on. I had a job for a long time. I was doing the double thing. I have little kids, like you said, waking up early after dinner and making sure everybody did their homework and all this stuff. And then eventually kind of moving on. But my career started in 2010, and then just moved and moved and moved. And I think I always joke and say, oh my God, I can pay something this month. This is amazing.
Right.
But as far as like insurance and stuff, I mean, I'm very grateful that my husband allows, his job allows us to have some kind of financial security, because it is hard as shit out here sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I owned a boutique software firm that, was my livelihood. That was my day job. And my night job was writing. And it was up until 2020 that we've started making that transition. 2020 rolled down, a lot of my customers, because, their whole business models changed. And luckily, thank God, the writing started to take off. So I'm full time now. So, it happens. The books can do it, but it's a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice. It's guns and butters. Every moment that you're in front of the computer, you're not with your spouse, you're not with your kid. And so you've got to navigate it. Not every part of your life is built for that. Sometimes the family or the career have to take precedent over the career.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your strong women characters. Like every book I read, it was just amazing to me, because we have this notion that back in those days, women just didn't have a lot of power. So you don't see that, but each one of your books had it in a different way. And I loved it. How do you get to that? How do you do that? Why did you do that? Was that what the research showed you, or is this something that you've always wanted to do? Like why these women were strong? That was just a big thing that I saw in each book. And take charge, even when people were against them. They're just like, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to be. Deal with it. How did you put that on the page? Leanna.
I was like, oh God, how would I answer this question?
Well, and you had a big one with Anna Maria because people were telling her to be quiet, right? That she's too out there, which you as Black women, I'm sure I heard that a lot. You're too loud, you're too this, you're too that. Like, but you still had her be who she was. Like, talk about how that was, because you're addressing these stereotypes and saying, yeah, sure, I laugh loud because I'm happy and it's okay.
So, and I think I played into, really, frankly, machismo culture is a thing. It just is, especially in a lot of Latina communities. And I just kept thinking about what kind of attitudes would these three sisters be up against in the 1800s in Mexico, with everything that was going on. And Ana Maria is the oldest. And I don't know if any of you guys are the oldest daughter. I am. Yeah, I am too. Yeah. And I feel like there's obviously stereotypes that go along with being the oldest daughter, but I think in a lot of ways they're really true. And you have, Ana Maria was the oldest daughter, and she wanted to be the good, like the example for her siblings, and she wanted to like live up to the expectations that were given to her by her very strict, domineering father. And suddenly they were sent away, and that like major force is not there. And it's for the first time in her life, she's like, oh my gosh, who am I? Who am I? Like, who do I want to be? Not who my father told me I was. Who do I want to be? And I had a lot of fun with that because I don't know, I'm a people pleaser. I know what it's like to have, my parents tell me, you're setting a good example for your brother and sister, and whatever. And to suddenly not have that influence, and to suddenly be able to make decisions for yourself and where you want to go, it was fun to explore that through Ana Maria's eyes, like how she would approach that. And it helped that she also was matched up with a hero. The male main character suited her. Like, they were, obviously it's a romance, I wrote it, so of course they were suited for each other. But with that eyes, she started off very naive, and she has this opportunity to grow and decide who she wants to be, and she takes it. And I was proud of her.
I use Dorothy Sterling has a book on Black women called We Are Your Sisters, Black Women of the 19th Century. And one of the things that she points out is what she called the gifts that Black women had coming up through the craziness that is America. And I think it can be applied to women of color in general. And we had three gifts. We worked. We weren't coddled. We weren't sitting at home drinking mint juleps. We worked, whether we were enslaved or free. Number two was our commitment to community and social activism. And number three, pushing the envelope on gender and race. And I think if you look at all of the women that we write about, regardless of where they are on the, as women of color, that we've all have that in our backgrounds, whether it's our grandmother, whether it's our mom, whether it's ourselves. And I think that has led to our communities being lifted up. And somebody, I don't know who said this, but says if you educate a woman, you educate a race. Mm-hmm. So those are my, and when I write my heroines, I don't do this consciously, but they seem to bring this part of themselves to the story. One heroine may have one gift, another heroine may have all three, one heroine may have two, but it all plays out And you see this in the stories and how they go through life and how they deal. So, you know, we all got those three gifts. You know, we work, commitment to community, social activism, and pushing the envelope on gender and race. So my 2 cents. Yeah, I'm coughing.
That's like a dollar. That was awesome.
I think there have always been strong women in history, and their
Yes.
stories haven't been told because white men were telling the stories. So I think these women existed, and we are creating them now in our fiction. Often, I'm a journalist in the day job, so often my stories are inspired by true things, true characters. In this series, they weren't necessarily, but in the series, it's a 3-book series. One, I wanted the heroines to have interesting jobs that would help inform who they are. So one is a travel writer, one is a bone setter, and one is a map maker. And I was inspired to do the map maker thing because in the day job, I wrote an article about how a lot of the earliest map makers in America were young girls in school who were learning how to make maps and made beautifully detailed maps. And then as I researched further, a lot of these women in general did not sign their maps because a map made by a woman would not sell as well. So I think we know there are many stories, women's stories of women of color in particular, that haven't been told. And they're in, shoe boxes under the bed, and they're, family lore that's passed down through the generations. And I think really just practically, I think the industry calls for an interesting, smart heroine. I don't think readers want to read a heroine who doesn't have a backbone, or at least she has to make that transition through the book.
I think listening to kind of that idea of like the stories of women, in your families and sort of in different communities. I think I was always inspired by the strong women in my family. And I always, this idea of like the progression of history, I think is incorrect. Right. It's something that I try to challenge. The fact that, well, women were subjugated back in the day and now they're independent. I think it's important to realize that there is not a straight line, because it also reminds us that women now today still face a lot of the challenges that women are historical protagonists face as well. And I think that's important to remind. And because of that, I actually like to write what are the ways that women can be powerful in spaces where they didn't have power. So it's perhaps easy to write about like a sword women, which I have, warriors and such, but then there's also the women who are not in a position of power, but women throughout the ages have found empowerment, and you can see the women in my family in the way they save money, the way they network with each other, the way like how did women find power? And I believe that there is a through line from the historical protagonists, to the women of my family and contemporary women of color, especially, and how they've found power. And they've kind of carried that on as cultural capital through the ages. And so that's why I feel that a lot of the strategies that you can see our heroines doing to gain power, to hold power, to gain influence are the same ones that women have to do today, because sometimes you cannot straight on claim that power, like fight the man straight on, but you can definitely, we have learned how to be clever through the ages, and you can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many women in history who are footnotes, who've done incredible things. They've been leaders, they've been assassins, they've been spies, they've been crowned queen. They've done so many different things, but yet, for the most part, history is told by the victors. They were told by the patriarchy. And, I was having a conversation with my husband today. There are just so many things that is ingrained when you look at a person of color, that you don't necessarily look at when you look at somebody from mainstream culture, Caucasian culture, and whatnot. I love my heroines to be within a sisterhood so that they can draw upon the strengths, like Beverly says, amongst each other. But I'm also playing to the reader now, because I don't want to continue stereotypes or patterns of behavior that we know didn't exist, but are being socialized as they would exist. And I want young women, old women, anybody who picks up these books to be encouraged that you can, even in the worst circumstances, you can conquer, you can do. In the book I think you read was The Duke, the Spy, the Artist, and the Lie. She's in a safe marriage with a man that has means, and she says she chooses herself and she leaves him. Now, it is a romance, so it's going, work out. But that is something it's rare to read that, because the patriarchy will tell you that women married and they stayed married no matter what the circumstances back in the day because of the economic means. And that is somewhat true to some things, but there were women who had enough and chose themselves and left and disappeared in the mass streets of London, because you could disappear at that moment in time and stay hidden, or you could break free from enslavement and run. People did it all the time. Yeah. So these are things that need to be carried forth in these stories. So I'm about modeling the women who have done, modeling these great sisterhoods to bring that strength to the page, and then also modeling the culture that really needs to be shown, breaking through the patriarchy and empowering these women in these books.
Yeah, I mean, everything you guys have said is incredible. In my story, similar to all of you, it's about dismantling the patriarchy, centering female agency and celebrating love in any form it comes in. And with women, I mean, Jeannie talked about strength and sword fighting. Strength can present in different ways, right? You can be like a gung-ho, very, strong woman who has to learn how to be vulnerable, kind of embrace different parts of herself to get that power that Jeannie was talking about, right? We get it, we try to get it any way we can. Just because something, might be canon, someone, that didn't happen in this time, doesn't mean that there is not an exception, especially when it comes to women, because we are very smart and we are very resilient, and we will try to find, any way we can to either protect those we love, defend, what were our dreams, what we want out of life. And I love what you said, Jeannie, about like the past, like informing who we are, because we do have things that we're facing and fighting against. It's so funny because like in the Duke in question, like the girl in it is a virgin, and I'm going there. Leave me alone. And people are like, oh, she would have never acted like that. I think you're kind of discounting a woman who is very in tune with herself, what she wants to accomplish. And even if she's 19 years old back then, which was, I'd say about 25, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping, but like, she knew what she wanted. It's a life and death situation. She makes a choice and she's like, it's my choice. It's my body. I saw this review today where someone was like, not about my books, but saying like, oh, it's never going to be my body, my choice. And I just wanted to be like, it's always your body, your choice, no matter the time period.
Right.
Even if you're limited by the patriarchy telling you what you can do with your body.
I have to tell, it's not really a segue, but I think that like in some, like medicine and witchcraft, and if you look at like how that is tied in to sort of the feminine story and like, this knowledge that's forbidden was really women taking control, because they took that knowledge of herbology and they took that knowledge of really, they had intimate knowledge of more so than doctors, and I think that like the story that is written is that women were not educated and they didn't have these things, but all these things that women did have were like relegated to secret knowledge, forbidden knowledge, hidden knowledge, all these things. And there's something just very, very empowering, very feminist in sort of bringing those things to light, that these women were like, yes, it's my body, it's my choice. I know more about it. I know how to bend nature to make it work. And so men don't see that story, and so they can say that women were demure and had laws against them and couldn't do these things, and they were doing all these things.
And even when you look in the Victorian era, people are like, oh, the Victorian era was very prudish. Well, it was, but think about all the stuff that was being published by doctors, Freud, all these people talking about sex. And then you had on the backside of this, all these people like doing pamphlets on like, here's this aid that will help you in this, or, you know, here's how you can get, you know, have like, I don't know, a better life at home. I mean, women were like reading and following all these things. And I don't like the idea of like people saying that it was a very prudish time, because I don't think it was. I think when you have information out there, there's always the flip side of somebody who's like, oh yeah, I know what to do with this information.
And
Yeah.
someone did looked at the birth records and the marriage records, and they were like, wow, these babies are coming at 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. A lot of pregnancy back then before marriage. You know, people don't want to talk about that, but yeah.
Well,
But you know, and then
let's
what
talk
Jeannie was saying about the herbs and all of that, and you know, that was shared information.
Mm-hmm.
You know, women shared that in a way to protect each other.
Yep.
You know, when the patriarchy would not, well, we're not going to allow that. We're not going to allow that. Like,
You
we'll
just
just
don't
give you
know
the, yeah,
what you don't know.
right. Exactly.
Well, can we talk? I mean, all of your books are steamy. Let's talk about that. I remember when I was a kid first reading romance and how it would always fade to black. And it's like, I think Harlequins were 186 pages all the time, because then it was over. And then when I picked romance late, like a few years ago, I was shocked. I'm like, yes, this is what I wanted to read then. Like, I'm so excited to see these women doing this. And so how did you get, like, how does this work for you when you're writing these scenes, when you're doing that? How do you decide what to put on the page? Is it, sometimes I'll like read the same thing in different romance. Like, is that a thing? Like, it's okay, this year, this is acceptable and we'll make sure this can happen, or what? Like, how does that work? What's the hidden knowledge on that, writing sex scenes?
I think you write what's comfortable for you. You know, romance has so many different levels. We have, you know, the erotica, we have, you know, sweet. We're not going to call it clean. We're going to call it sweet. I think it depends on, you know, what you're writing. It also depends on the times. Because when I started in 94, if you look at some of those older books, love scenes were 10 pages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had to be able to write
Here for
10
it.
pages of a love scene. And you might have had maybe, you know, no more than maybe 4, but that's 40 pages of lovemaking out of that, you know, 200, 300, whatever, you know, page book. So I think it depends on the times have changed, depends on what you're writing, and depends on how comfortable you are with, and what the characters want to do. Because sometimes the characters will do stuff that we were like, wait, what are you doing? You know, and we're just sort of trying to, on the keyboard, trying to keep up, you know, so it varies, at least in my world.
See, I'm a crack door. So this is
Oh,
like the compromise of slam door, fade to black, the crack door. So you can kind of hear stuff. But you're not gonna get that play by play. I'm sorry. Yeah, you know, anybody's ready, y'all understand. Ain't not play that.
Yeah.
Mine's open door, open window, open everything. It's like, yeah, just look inside and get it. No, I'm just kidding. I started out in YA, so it was a little different. You know, obviously a lot of that stuff. I mean, I chose as a YA writer to have mostly closed door, and then going into historical, you know, like Ms. Bev said, it's like, you know, you make the decisions about how much you want to put on the page. And then also for me as a writer, you know, you want to balance that with emotional beats, right? You just don't want it to be all physical. It has to happen at certain times, right? Like, and I talked about the Duke in question. They literally have sex in the second chapter, but that's like life and death. It's like, it happens and it's very quick, because I wanted it to be quick, because when I have the emotional connection later on, it's a different kind of sex scene. And it's funny when you asked the question, Kathy, about like, how do you know when you can put something on page, like when's the timing? You know, I'm writing a sapphic romance, and it's my first for a Pride Not Prejudice anthology this year for Pride that I'm really proud to be a part of. And there was a part where I got in the book where I was like, oh, do I do closed door? And then I was like, why am I even asking this question? All my other books are open door. And I'm writing this, developing this relationship, and I was like, I want to go all the way with this book. And it's a novella, but I did it, and I love how it came out because, you know, I've always been like a, you know, I know that Megan said it, but I said it first. I signed it in my books, Love Wins. I've written that for like 10 years. I'm just saying. I'm taking it. I'm kidding. Anyway, you know, so I mean, I just think it depends. It depends on what you want to put on page. And then also, can we normalize brown nipples for the love of God?
Oh God, yes.
Okay. I'm just closing out on that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry.
I love
I
it.
actually don't love to write sex scenes.
And that's okay.
Yeah, but I do write them because you know, I don't write 10-page sex scenes. I write maybe a page. As a reader, I want to see some of that, but I don't want to see 10 pages of that for me. And so that's what I write. And it's also a journey. Obviously, something has to happen in that scene that advances. I see you. that advances the story. So that becomes part of what you put into the love scene.
Right.
You know, is someone afraid of emotional intimacy? You know, has someone been, you know, abused, or all that plays into the scene and makes it richer. And it's those scenes, at least when I write them, I try to make them not only be about the sex. They happen to be having sex, but there is an emotional journey that's
Right.
happening here.
Right.
That is, the characters are growing. No pun intended.
She says that, and then she drops that with the mic drop at the end.
Yeah, I think what a lot of, you know, readers, when I was a reader, just a reader, what you don't realize is that what makes the scene steamy is not the body parts. You think it is
Right.
because there are body parts, but it's
Exactly.
really how vulnerable you're allowing your characters to be. And so, you know, there are romances with there are love scenes without graphic descriptions that are super steamy and super
Yeah.
dirty.
Yeah.
And it's really where you let your mind go. That's what makes it exciting is how that, you know, you think like, oh, should I be reading this? And it's not that you see a brown nipple and oh no, it's more that you're really seeing deep into someone's inner thoughts, and it's quite private, and they're really letting it open, you know, and we're really kind of opening that in there. I always like to kid. I'm like, we think that the fantasy is that you have a hot guy and he's sexy, but the real fantasy is that you actually know what he's thinking. That's the fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or that he meets your needs. I love, you know.
Meets your needs, and he reveals his feelings. I'm like, wow, there's a guy who's actually going to reveal his feelings.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
You know,
fine.
and that's why
fine.
In a coherent way.
And that's why I feel like some of the best writing is done in romance. You know, because even though we all come at it differently, those emotional beats that are so important are there in all of its many forms and in all of its stages. I mean, if you look at how love scenes are written in quote unquote lit fic, I mean, it's some of the worst stuff I've ever seen. You get no emotion, all you get is slide A, slide B. But when you read romance, people are like, whoa, you know, the wording, the rhythm, the beat,
And it's
the
uncomfortable for
sensuality.
people. It's
Right.
like it pushes them to like really accept that something's going on here. Feelings, you know, with capital Fs.
All the feels.
And so they think that they're laughing at the nipples, but they're really just so uncomfortable about the feelings.
Yeah. And we don't care.
Yeah.
Because we're going to write what we're going to write. You know? So
I mean, as a mom, I've been asked if my kids have read my books. I mean, I would like my 18-year-old to go read my books because he gets exactly what you just said, that full story, the emotional with the physical, with the mental, with the intellectual. All of it's there. It's full. Go learn how to please a woman, child. Here you go. Here's the book. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So
Liana, I'm
important.
sorry. I interrupted you before. So you were going to say something. Yeah.
No, I was just, the only thing I was going to say is I don't necessarily plan out my sex scenes. I am a planter. So like I plot just enough to know where the story's going, and then I discover everything else as I'm writing, because I like to figure out how the characters interact on the page while I'm writing them. So it might be that I'm writing, this book is like super slow bird, and I tried to get them to kiss beforehand, and they were very stubborn. It just wasn't who they were, and they
Yeah.
weren't ready for it, and I had to listen to them. And then in the second book, the first time I started writing, they like were super horny in like the third chapter, and I'm like, you need to probably slow down a little bit. Actually, I wrote it out and then I took it out for later. But I kind of, my creative process, I need to just throw them on the page together and figure out what they're going to do. And that kind of dictates all of it, how it's all going to play out. Is it going to be really explicit? I don't know, because maybe they're really explicit characters and like that's how they're going to show it with each other. Or maybe they're more mellow and low key and they're going to, I don't know, give little hints. So I find out while I'm doing it, and I like it that way. It's fun for me.
I just realized there's a Q&A. So I saw, so there was a question about is Bridgerton Regency? And I thought yes, but they take liberties. So someone may have better answer for
No,
that.
it's supposed to be Regency. I mean, they are
Yes.
written in the Regency period. Yeah.
Yep.
And there's also a question, what is the diversity like in the makeup of your teams who help you all get your books from rough draft to printed book?
Not very much. Well,
Not much. Not
It's okay.
much.
A mixed bag. Mixed
Yeah.
bag.
Yeah.
it's primarily white, I think. Would
Yeah,
be the-
white and female mostly.
Yeah.
I was
It's like 80%, 85%, maybe 90%.
yeah. I just lost my editor at Kensington. She moved on to another house. So the great Essie Soag
go?
was
Where'd she
she's
go?
over. She's in Berkeley, girl.
Oh, that's
she's
right.
in
She said
Berkeley.
Berkeley.
In Berkeley.
Yeah.
And you
Those are
you
my
watch
two
it, girl. I
favorites,
know you in Berkeley.
Kensington and Berkeley are the best ones with romance.
She
I'm gonna-
started
I'm
out as
gonna-
a she started out
I had a
as a
quick
baby editor with
question.
me and Erica. Yeah.
I'm going to make a shout out to my incredible new publisher, Joy Revolution, which was started by Nikki and Dave Yoon. And it is about books by people of color featuring people of color. So it's phenomenal. My editor is a lovely Black woman, and she edited this, and she is fantastic. Bria Reagan, she's incredible. And I feel very, 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 very honored to be part of Nikki and Dave's imprint.
Congratulations.
It's so cool. Yeah, thank you.
Is this
No,
their first
the
year with
focus.
books coming out? I knew they had. Is this the first year they have their books coming out?
Yeah,
I think
Talia
I've seen, like,
Hibbert's
maybe two
highly suspicious
other
was
ones.
the first. Yeah,
Yes, with
Mhm.
Talia Hibbert.
yeah.
Also
Hers
writing
just came out
YA.
last week.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, they're all
romance
YA.
writing YA.
Well, when
I don't know.
when you're skilled as a historical romance writer, you can write any genre at this
Yeah.
point, because that's the hardest of the hard. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
get the research down, and then once again, everybody knows how a romance is supposed to end, but you have to make that journey creative and different. So literally, it's the playground, it is the school, the college of writing is
Yeah.
when you write historical romance.
There's
Yeah.
actually a great question that I think goes along with what you're saying, Vanessa. Well, before I say the question, I want to make sure that Ms. Jenkins hears this, because someone just wants to say thank you for introducing me to romance books. I now want to marry a pirate. Thank you for all the panelists. This is for Marissa. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to spend. So wanted to make
Oh,
sure.
you're welcome.
that-
When you
but the
find your pirate, let us know.
So the question is, how do you make sure that your characters make sense linguistically for the time period?
You got
Study
to
the language.
study the language. There's
Study the language.
books, newspapers,
Mhm.
there's
Diaries. Yeah.
I think that for me, where I'm writing somewhere, I'm writing a story where the language is translated. You have to assume it's translated. I study, but I study translations. I do study poetry. I study sort of realistic, because I don't want them to, the biggest mistake is people think, oh, people in the past sound stilted. They didn't sound stilted to each other. So rather than trying to recreate the speech, I try to recreate the feel of it, but I try to still make it sound natural. It's more important
Yeah.
to make it believably historical than accurately historical, because Old English,
Yeah.
you know, you want to be you want to be speaking of what the equivalent would be if they were speaking, you
Right.
know, in that time
Right.
period, because they sound conversational to each other, they sound informal to each other. Not everyone was like ye old, you know.
Yeah.
Sorry about
I mean, please,
that.
Yeah. No, no,
please,
totally.
please don't use Valley Girl, you know,
Mhm.
sentences in a historical. My God, it's
But
like
it's just
fingernails on a chalkboard.
It just, you know, like Bev was saying, you look at the books. Jane Austen uses contractions in dialogue, you know, so in her characters. I mean, so for you Regency people out there, contractions
Yeah.
are used. So
Yeah,
so
that was a
read the
big
series.
thing and that was a big thing when I started. They didn't want you to use contractions, and I'm like, what is wrong with? I mean, this was editorial. These are the editors.
Mhm.
Like, no, we're not doing that. We're using contractions. Sorry, you know.
Yeah.
and I
Anyway.
think
Is it because
I
they
think that's
didn't
a-
research as much as you did? Like you guys have done
That's a big
the
issue.
back, but
with-
expensive. Like, is that why?
It's Barbara Kirtland's fault.
I mean, it's a big issue with readers who
Yeah.
think they know.
Right.
We're researching these books. We're researching these words. And
Yeah.
a lot of times they'll say, you know, that word is what's the word? Anachronistic. And it's not an acronym. It actually existed at that time. It was used at that time. I've started doing I've done a few on Instagram on about words that existed during the Regency, you know, cocktail. And of course I was looking for them. Now I can't find any of them, but there are a lot of words that people thought
I had
did
to get
not
this book.
exist.
I had to get this book because I need to show it. Okay, it's called the Dictionary
Yes,
of the
I love
Vulgar
that. I use it all the
Tongue.
time.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It-
So there are a lot of
etymology-
words
yeah.
that
I don't think
sound
I don't
too
think
modern, but they're not.
I don't think they realize how much research we do. You know, we are experts, not experts, but we are experts in what we do. You know, and people are like, well, no, you can't use this. You know, it's like we were talking on Twitter, you know, about you can't call a dick until the end of, you know, the 18th, 19th century. You know, so, well, what was it before then? It was a yard, YARD. So yeah, we know this kind of stuff, people. You know, leave us alone.
But there is,
I started putting in the author's note.
Yeah.
Like I wrote a book about a
Mhm.
parachutist, and you know,
Yeah.
people, and that was before I was published, and so I submitted it to contests, and they're like, "This is not realistic, a woman parachutist in the Regency era," and you know, they existed, and there was one who was in particular. So you know, now I put it at the often, because I know people are going to say that couldn't happen, or there were
Right.
no Arabs in England in 1810.
Mhm.
You know, so now in the author's note, I anticipate all those that couldn't have been, and I put that in the author's note. And it's
Yeah.
amazing how I don't get any of that anymore. Like
I
used to.
feel like it's a really awesome question, like segue into like BIPOC authors having to write receipts and author's notes. Like
That was
That's
my
just-
question. Is this a thing, or is it just
The thing.
BIPOC authors? Because that's where I've only seen it, and they're so extensive. Your notes are so extensive. I'm reading it. It's like another book. I'm like, these people have read 7 books to write this romance, which is already
Yeah.
maligned because it's romance, which is stupid. And because, like Bev said, you've done the work, and you have to be able to write so many different ways, and you still have to have the trope, but to transcend the trope. And then you have people of color in it. I'm not even sure how you do this. Like, how are you
Yeah,
even awake at this time of night? Because that's got to be so much work. Is this a thing just for BIPOC authors? Are you the only ones that have to make sure you include this research?
No.
I mean, my parachutist was white, and people, you know, think Diana Quincy is obviously, you know, a whitish name. So I mean, in that case, because they didn't think a woman at that time could be doing something that amazing. You know, so I still, you know, so that was not color related, but I do think authors
but it's
of
still
color-
marginalized community if we're talking about feminism, like sexism, right?
True, but most
women.
of the readers are women, right? So,
Right, yeah.
but I
yeah.
think authors of color always, I mean, that I had to bring the receipts for a parachutist, right?
Right.
But I
yeah.
think authors of color always have to bring the receipts.
Yeah, we
You
do.
have to prove that you have a right to exist in this space, and that
Yep.
you existed in this space back in the day too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
There's a lot of prove it. There's a lot of prove it in there, but I think also just to the flip side of it is I think historical readers are also very curious. So there's an opportunity. They do want to learn more
Yeah.
about what the culture
Mhm.
and the facts. They want to know what if this is. I do the same thing when I watch like a movie or read a book, and I'm like, was that real? Was that, did Hamilton really do that? And I think our readers are like that as well. So there's also a good side to this. You do have to come armed. I'm like, there are facts on the cutting room floor. Come at me. I am waiting
Yeah.
for it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of like expect that challenge, whereas I think maybe another author would just kind of be accepted for it or whatnot, not challenged
Yeah.
in the same way.
Yeah.
I treat it now as giving you, the reader, a behind the scenes. So
Yeah.
that was a healthy attitude adjustment.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Historical readers do love that
Yeah.
extra look, that extra
this-
peek.
Bev, I think it was another Bev pep talk. And she was like, your troubles will be diminished if you put an author's note in the back of your book.
Yeah.
And I took it to heart. And the Vanessa-ism is to put it on steroids. So sometimes it's bibliography. So if you want to go look, you got it, girl. I give you everything, so that you can go and find these nuggets in history that we need to know more about.
Yeah.
And you have everything on your website too. You have amazing resources on your website.
Yeah, she's got an amazing website. Yeah, I did a Biblist and author note with my very first book in '94. Because people were like, well, did Black people really do this? And blah, blah, blah. But the first, I'm trying to think if she was the only one. I don't remember if she's the only one or not, but Susan Johnson, who was real popular in the 80s and a little bit in the early 90s, was the first author that I actually, read a lot, who had a author note, and she had footnotes in her books because she was writing about native tribes in Wyoming and Montana, with tribes that I was not familiar with. But she had actual footnotes like number 6, number 7, number 8. And so I tried to, when I had to do I was like, okay, we're going to do a Susan Johnson. I'm going to put this Biblist in the back. I left out the footnote numbers though. But she's a white author. So she was the first author that I remember having footnotes and an author note at the back of the book.
People make cultural assumptions based on the ethnicity of the characters. And something I haven't addressed really yet is, I don't put religion in my books. I mean, Arabs can be Muslim. I am Muslim. But they can also be Christian.
Yeah.
And, and particularly my characters are Palestinian, as am I. And, there's a lot of Christian Palestinians. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't address that in the book, right? And so a lot of the criticism is, oh, a Muslim would never marry a duke because they make the assumption that they're not. And even like a copy editor who's well-meaning, in my mind, these characters are Christian right now, but I'm not addressing it. And because a lot of the Arabs who were in the country at the time were Christian. So, but one of the copy editors, I think I had said something about like her Sunday best or something. And so she puts a comment, but as a Muslim, would it be a Sunday best? Like she's checking me. So, I mean, I haven't really addressed that yet. And I really don't want to get into a religious kind of conversation. But anyway, that's something.
But that's exactly like the weight of representation, right? That's like expecting one story to carry everybody's identity, and that is never going to happen, ever.
Because we're too different. There's too many different ways of being who we are.
Yes, and I mean, it's just in this particular series, they're Christian. I mean, it's. I mean, I probably write Muslim characters later, but I'm just talking about the assumptions.
Yeah. When people don't know very much about a culture, a people, the few things they know become like huge.
Canon.
And then when
Yes.
you are one of the few authors writing that sort of representation, you have that extra, whether or not you want it, a lot is put on it, a lot is put on you in terms of expectations, fairly or
Well,
unfairly.
yeah. I mean, the scrutiny and demand for perfection against marginalized authors is infinitely
Yeah.
more.
And there is no perfect, you can't be perfect. You didn't match their idea of what your book should have been. There's a lot of that. Like, I wish this book had been this. It's like, but this book is this, and I'm sorry, I'm the only one writing this type of book, so you can't have the book you want. But
Write your own. Write your own.
write your
There's also the pressure to not play into a stereotype. Like, I
Yeah.
can't make the Arab brothers, the heroine's Arab brother, domineering,
Right.
because that plays into a stereotype, right?
Right.
So they have to all, for me right now, they're all nice because there's enough out there where they're domineering and they're bad actors. And so I do feel a responsibility because there's not many people in the romance space writing Arab characters. I don't know of any, although Evie Dunmore, I think, is going to write Lebanese characters in her next series.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do feel the weight of that. In a way, I can't expand the characters maybe as much as I want, because I don't want to play into stereotypes. And I don't know if other people have that same.
Yeah. I think it's something that we all have to look at. I mean, you look at, Black men, and the stereotypes tied to them. So I try and be very, very careful to make them not be stereotypes, because you don't want to feed that crap. You want to expand the vision. You want to, want them to be respected and looked up to and be heroes, and not the quote unquote deadbeat dad, or the adulterer, or the all of that
I think
that we get.
it goes back to what Vanessa was saying at the beginning about our own the voices in our own heads, our own demons. And I think when you are writing in your own culture, you then face not only the voices from other people, but you start to see like, oh, these are the things that I have inside me that I get to get to untangle, get to finally grapple with. And I think that is a lot of the, the responsibility you feel, the questions you ask. Is it okay if I do this? And that all comes into play. It's all very complex. And even when you come back to the word of like the question about language, I've wrestled about like names. Are my names gonna be too othering? Are they gonna alienate readers? Are they not? And I'm like, should I have been putting that much into it? Did I really need to? I don't know. It's that the voices in my head wrestling with myself.
But what I'll say next actually addresses how many diversity we have on our teams. When I wrote the first draft of An Earl, a Girl, and a Toddler, this, for just background, the Earl is a barrister. He's a Black man. He just got elevated, so he's a new Earl. And I wrote him as I write a lot of my heroes, arrogant, brash. And Essie, Black editor, she's like, I really love Daniel, but I wonder how many readers will be turned off, because if he were a white Earl, it would be no second thought. But because he's a Black Earl, being brash, uppity, would that be how he's labeled? And I sat back and I thought about it. And that's not how I wanted him, because, there's very few, Black Earls, Black men heroes out there. I redid the book. I made him into a cinnamon roll. He's very much, so he still has his hard edge, but he's very much a cinnamon roll. And it's one of my favorite books. But I don't think I would have gotten that same level of feedback, honest gut level feedback, if it wasn't Essie, if it wasn't a Black editor who read it and just had that honest concern. And then, sometimes, your editor will come back with something. You don't have to do it. You can stat it. But that feedback was key. And once again, this is one of my favorite books, and he's a cinnamon roll.
Yeah.
Amelie, in your book, and Queen Bee, the father who's I think he's a Marquess, right? He's a Marquess. And he's kind of like brash to his son. tells his
He's
son
a
who he can
Duke, yeah.
play with and what he can do. How did you, because he's of color too, right? Like, how did you decide how you're going to go with that character?
So the father of, so the Marquess of Ridley, that's his courtesy title. His father's a duke. So when he dies, he'll inherit that title. And he is a white male. And his mother is of West Indian descent. So my hero is a mixed character. And then my heroine is an Indian character. You know, I mean, I just wanted this book to just be like, if you're reading any other book, and we've touched on this before, you don't always want to have stuff like all the issues being addressed, but there's two avenues of historical romance, right? You have the straight up fantasy, right? If you want to look at, you know, talk about Bridgerton, where it's an all BIPOC, all LGBTQIA plus cast, you know, where it's very inclusive and it's wonderful. We want to see ourselves on screen in the on the page. That's that. And then you have the other one where you have some elements of truth, which might be a heavy, tragic, shitty truth that you have to navigate in the book. Otherwise, it, you know, it undermines your whole story, right? Because we can't pretend that the dukes and the aristocracy didn't benefit off oppression. We can't, right? I grew up in a colonial country in the Caribbean. My entire lived experience is informed by indentured laborship and slavery. That's the makeup of my country. And on top of that, I was never a marginalized race. I was always a majority race. So when I moved here, like to the States, like it was a completely different change of thought, understanding, appreciation, even words, all that stuff. So like, you know, in this story in Queen Bee, like I wanted it to just be like a boy and a girl. Didn't matter what their skin color was, what their sexual preferences was, what, you know, whether they were able-bodied, not able-bodied, cishet, you know, I mean, all of it to just be accepted, inclusive. Did I have some discussions of race and identity? Absolutely. I don't think you can write a book, any book, with a person of color in it and not address those themes. So, I mean, I hope I did a good job with, you know, how they were portrayed, but at the end of the day, it's about a girl who has revenge on her mind. Yes, she's of Indian descent. Yes, I have Indian, you know, elements in there to elevate the story, to like add some richness to it. And same with the hero's culture, and his West Indian mother and his white father, lots of stuff informing that as well, and how they interacted together. And it's a, you know, a love story. So that's kind of where I went with that. Sorry, I got really like fired up just now.
Yes, you did.
And I don't even have any wine on me. Like, what is happening?
It's the weight of representation, like you said, though. It comes in different forms. And
Yeah, we
different
have
ways.
a comment just saying like, yeah, you guys are teaching more history than school, so you are giving us an education, Amelie.
And I mean, with any of these books, right, when we're writing about characters of color and stuff, it's all about, I call it the 3 I's, right? And the 3 I's are intent, interpretation, and impact. We can control maybe like one of those things, and that's the first one, right?
Yeah.
Interpretation and impact is going to be informed by other people.
Yeah.
And the only way that can be combated, in my opinion, in publishing is by more stories and more people of color in purchasing positions.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And marketing.
And marketing.
Yeah.
Yes. We're supposed to have some audience questions at the time. I think if you have any questions, audience, drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A. But I wanted to ask you, like why romance? There's just, you know, romance is so maligned, even though it is the best. And that's what, like, I wish I had an all romance store. The more I read about it, that's the more I focus on too, because it's the story that transcends to me. It's about the love. It's about all of that. And it's like, why did you choose to go into this genre as opposed to lit fic, which really is a stupid thing, but why?
When people ask me that, they say, well, why romance? And I say, why not? Why not?
Great answer.
You know, and that's my standard answer. So that's all I got for that.
I feel like romance is a safe space. It's a safe space to explore what you want, what you don't want, you know what I mean? Not something that's on the page isn't necessarily how you're going to live your life. in your own bedroom, but it's nice in your head. For me, at least, I like those 10-page sex scenes. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, for me, I didn't intend to be a writer. I mean, I'm a journalist, so I've been writing all my life, I guess, but I didn't think I could tell a story. And I started reading romance. Really, I was like, 40 probably. I'm so late. I'm a late bloomer, people. So I read like, 30 romances one summer, and I thought, gosh, I want to write this. And I don't know how it happened. I mean, I had never really written anything, and I sat down and wrote a book. And then I asked my friends, what do you do with a romance that you've written? How do you submit it? And then I started doing at that time, Romance Writers of America was a good place, a good way to break in.
Yeah.
Through their contests, which is ultimately I met my agent through a contest. So that's how I fell into romance. I just read it and wanted to write it.
Romance was my happy place. So, we go back in time, parents' marriage falling apart, craziness happening, changes in economic circumstances, I would go to the grocery store and I would get the Regencies, or I'd get the Beverleys or the Brendas, and I'd sneak them back in the house and I'd just read them, and they took me away from all that. And when I got in college, I did, I'm going away from the calculus and I'm getting the romance books because I know what I'm getting, a happy place, a happy ever after. They're gonna go through some drama and some stuff, and maybe I'm gonna learn some stuff, but at the end of the day, it's the happy ever after. And it's safety. And so I would love to give that to the world. I want to return what I got with more.
Yeah.
For me, and again, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, for me, like, I also, like everyone's here, I was a big fan of historical romance, and particularly in the 90s. They were so adventurous, they were so bold. It was always like swashbuckling. You're going on these adventures, you're going on a ship, you're meeting a pirate, you're you're doing these things. And the stories that I loved were not were not mainstream stories. They were these Chinese epic adventures, but in my heart, I was like, it's just perfect for romance. Romance is bold, romance is sweeping, romance is emotional. And like, just in this like stubbornness, I was like, in my head, it just fit perfectly, even though it didn't until it did, I guess.
Say, like Vanessa, I need that happy ever after. I like, no matter what happens in the story, I need to know that it's going to all work out in the end, especially for the female main character, especially. And I started writing romance after my second child was born, and I was dealing with postpartum depression, and I didn't even know it at the time until much later. And writing was a way that it was something I can control when everything felt out of control. And I needed those moments of happiness. I needed that serotonin so desperately then. And even now, like I just, whatever I put my characters through, or when I read any of these ladies, books, I know at the end they'll be tied up. And so much about, the world today, the good guy doesn't always win, and things don't always work out. So often, there's so much to be frustrated by watching the news or just going on Twitter. And so I want to be able to open up a book and just know, no matter what happens, I'm going to hopefully smile at the end. So that's why romance is for me.
Yeah.
Oh, it's awesome.
You get a question, what's your favorite romance book?
And that's a testament. What Leanna just said is how powerful romance is in people's lives, or can be. And that's really, what more could you ask?
Special. So this is going to be the hardest question. So the question, as Kathy was saying, is what's your favorite romance book?
Oh gosh.
Lord have mercy.
I started out, like, I like to call the 4 J's: Judith McNaught, Drew Devereaux, Julie Garwood, and look, Beverly Jenkins, she's a J. Hey. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
But yeah, those, I mean, I still have them. Their spines are broken. If you look up there, it's Ridiculous.
Well read, well loved.
Oh, she's getting all hers.
Well read, well loved. Yeah.
Well read, well loved.
Yeah. Well read, well loved. When they bring him into
When
signings
the
and
spines,
the spines are broke and the pages are all curled up.
there's
And,
tape.
maybe the kid dropped oatmeal on, a couple pages were stuck together. I call them
I was gonna
well
say,
read and well loved.
I feel like I have like a ton of favorite romances, but for me, there's like one book that I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it made the biggest impact in my life. And that is Sarah McLean's No Good Deed Goes Unpunished. I was reading it, and if you've ever got to the end, there was this twist with who the protagonist would be in the fourth book. And it blew my mind. And I was in the midst of, as I mentioned, I had postpartum depression, I had a colicky baby, I was a mess. And I remember my husband coming home and he's like, how did the day go? And I have a crying baby and I have a toddler who's being a toddler, I'm sure. And the first thing, I didn't tell him anything about that. I was like, you have to hear about this book I read. And I told him everything that happened in the book. And I told him what happened at the end and like this new character. And he just patiently listened to me tell him about this book. And he was like, I haven't seen you this animated in a long time. And I hadn't been. And he goes, have you ever thought about writing your own book? And I still remember I told him, I'm not smart enough to write these books.
Oh.
And he gave me that look, that look your spouse gives you, like, don't be dumb. Now you're being dumb. Like,
I just gave you that look.
Yes, exactly.
Me too.
Like, yeah, that's it. He was like, so learn. And that's started writing, is because he encouraged me to do it. And it was that book. So when I think of all the books, like, I have so many favorites, but I just remember that book because it kind of jump started my career.
That's an amazing story. You have a hero.
I know, that's the best part.
You
I
have a
know.
hero. Yeah, one of those
He's-
supportive ones. Yeah, I love it.
Mhm.
I don't have a favorite.
Yeah,
I just
don't
love
have
the
a
genre.
Mhm.
Yeah,
The
I
genre
mean,
is my favorite.
Yeah.
What's an author that you would recommend then, if you don't have a
If-
favorite?
If pressed, I am going to say Joanna Bourne is like I'm a fangirl of hers. Black Hawk, the Black Hawk.
Yes.
Mhm.
Black Hawk is, if you want to like recommend like starter historical romance, I would go for the Black Hawk, although all of hers are really good. And that's just the spy versus spy, great clothes, great hero, great, just French.
Oh, Jeannie, I have a signed first pass page from Joanna Bourne. I'm just saying. I'm kidding.
No, I wrestled her. I wrestled her online and stalked her, and I have a reader's copy of the Black Hawk, and with differences from the final copy, like I can
That's
compare
awesome.
the two.
All
So,
such
not to one up,
fangirls,
not to
like
one up
people.
you or not to one up or anything like
Dang
that.
it, stop it.
I mean,
Listen, I get to
Loretta
panel
J.
with Beverly
Right,
Jenkins
he-
in like 2 months. So don't be jealous of me. Okay?
You got
The
you're on the
queen.
panel. You're on
I'm
the
with
panel.
the queen.
I'm on a panel with her right now.
Yeah, but I'm gonna be able to touch her.
Y'all are so silly.
Run, Beverly, run.
I know. I know. But anytime, and I always feel like anytime I get together with you all, you teach me a lot. Whether it's different perspectives, whether it's idea, whether it's your journey. And all of our journeys are unique. And it just makes me love romance even more because of the women and the guys and, all of the identities that make up Romance Landia, as we call it on Twitter. It's a good thing. So thank y'all for teaching me tonight too. So I love it.
Great time. I learned a lot.
Well, you're always
would
teaching
like
us, so.
Yeah, this was fantastic. You guys are amazing. The work was already amazing, but just having this extra to it, just it's very powerful. I don't know. I don't have any other questions. I can come up with some. Billy, I don't know if you had some more questions or if we want to take some more audience. I would love for them to talk about, I think I read, Beverly, your book was number 3 in the series, because I started with 3, then I had to go to
Oh,
2
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
1.
There's
So I
3 in the
went
Women Who Dare.
backwards. Same thing with Diana. I had to go backwards, but talk about a little bit about this whole series, because it's a powerful series. I think it's Women Who Dare. I love the families that were
Mhm.
featured in each one. Can you give us a little bit more about that?
Well, we came up with the name because, I've always written about women who dare, from the first book on. 3 different stories. A lot of times when you have series, either the characters get connected in some way, but these are 3 distinct stories, but there are 2 recurring families from the first and the second book. But I loved it. I mean, I wrote my first cinnamon roll for book 2. He was, always had a book in his hand. And only thing I didn't, I mean, it was this stereotypical nerd kind of thing, right? The only thing I didn't give him was glasses. But, and there's no definite, we don't know what's going to happen to them at the end of the story. I think it's my first HFN, Happy for Now. A little bit of controversy with my readers because some people were, what do you mean she doesn't want to have kids? There's a lot of romance readers who have, chosen to be childless. And I wrote I don't want kids heroine, and had a small pushback on that. But then the people who are childless said, please write more. There's, not too many people writing for us. So, trying to do something different with every book. Don't write the same book every time. So
I have
that's
a
what that.
question. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I have a question for the panel, if I may. We've sort of been in this era where the industry is reaching out to own voices. And do you think it's a fad, or do you think it is a progression that's here to stay?
I think ethnicity and identity could never be a fad, but I think marketing and, like I talked about purchasing before, people would want to capitalize on what's selling, right? I did have somebody tell me once, oh, you're so lucky to be a person of color, an author of color right now. And I was like, what, for the 5% that people are buying? Sure. Yeah. I'd be happy to be part of that. I don't think that it is a fad. I think I'm hopeful, Diana, that more stories are going to get published, that we have more of a cross section of what our world looks like, not just from a white, straight, cis, het male perspective, and I love reading inclusive stories, so I hope there's more.
I have to say this though. I have to say this.
Say
I
it.
don't think it's a
Do
fad,
it.
but I think it's a misnomer. I think it's a misrepresentation to say like, oh, multicultural is a genre, own voices is a thing, right? Because all of a sudden own voices is this thing, but there are still voices within own voices that people don't want to hear, right? Because they're not going to sell. And then that's even more harmful. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm not own voices enough, or people get called out for being not own voices enough, or people are doing own voices, but it's still not a story people want to hear, things like that. So I think like multicultural isn't a genre. Like people would say like, oh, you are multicultural. It's like, yeah, but within multicultural, there's stories, and all of those stories have a different bent, a different genre as well. So it's just, my hackles get up when people say own voices as if it's a genre, or diversity as if it's a genre, or multicultural as if it's a genre in and of itself.
The token and tokenism.
Readers are trying to diversify their shelves more. But it needs to be said, if you look at bestseller lists, who's dominating those lists and who's on them, and the books that are on them, like how long have they been there for?
So exhausting.
And so it's like I said, I like to think that newer readers who are coming into the genre are looking for more diversity and want diverse stories. And maybe it's something that's going to take time, I guess, for it to spread. And I know we can't use like bestseller lists as like the parameters for, or, you know, for how things are going, but you know, they're very visible. And so, and it can't help but to look at it and be like, oh, well.
Yeah.
But you know, it's one of these things where the publisher has to see readers buying these books,
Money. It's the
excited about
money.
these books. And so marketing and sales will kick in because, like, you know, when this book came out, A Duke, the Lady, and the Baby, it's now being translated in Romanian. Come on, guys, Romanian, Hungarian, French, and I think 2 other languages. It's crazy.
Wonderful.
But they got behind the concept, and they did the marketing and the push, and people buy the books. So it's about having the books on the store shelves so people can see it, and then making noise. So every reader out here, if you love to see this happen and it not to be a fad, basically a moment in a blip in the marketing, you gotta get out here, tell people about the stories you love and things like that. That makes it.
Yeah, because I've been out here, what, 30 years? And I'm still
You're
like
no fad.
this. And I'm still
Yeah, I
like
know.
this. Still like
The
this.
goat. The
You know?
GOAT.
I do think, sorry, I think
Go
Gen
ahead.
Z is the most ethnically diverse generation.
Mhm.
So if they are reading romance, I think, you know, that's good news for all of us.
Yeah.
Did I interrupt you, Miss Beth?
No, you're fine. What you were saying, I was just being snarky and saying, you know, I've been out here 30 years. I'm still waiting, folks, you know. So, but it is much better than it was in 1993 when I sold my first book. You know, there was no real diversity or inclusivity or, you know, any of the words that we're using now to describe. There was no, you know, no people of all identity, none of that. So there has been progress, but I'm waiting to see in my lifetime, you know, quite a bit more. So, but you know, I'm talking to the choir here, so you know, I need to be
Right.
talking to publishers and marketing and all of that. So, but keep
Yeah,
I
writing
mean,
great
but
stories.
you've paved the way though. I mean, like I look sometimes when I'm trying to think about when I feel crappy, I think about you and I'm like, I just want to be classy and keep writing my stories like Bev Jenkins. I mean, you I'm gonna quote you, and this is gonna might embarrass you, but I don't care. You said in an article in the Walrus, and I wrote this down because I'm prepared. You said you never entered like the Ritas because you, and I quote, knew better than to open your spirit to people who can't fathom an author of color having the nerve to take a seat at the table. And that has always just sat with me because we are at the table and we're at the table because you went to the table. You know what I mean? Like yeah, anyway, I love you.
I love y'all too, you know.
you
But
built
you know,
the table.
but you know, you know, I have to, and I always have to do this. I always have to give, you know, thanks to Sandra Kitt and Elsie Washington
Oh yeah.
and Vivian, you know, because Vivian started all of this as a Black woman. So, but thank you for the flowers. I appreciate it.
Could you give us a sneak? This is a question from the audience. Can you give us a sneak peek of what's next for each author?
Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. I'm writing a book that I have been promising my readers for 20 years. Because if I don't do this book now, if I don't do this book now, they're going to be out in front of my house with baseball bats and signs and stuff. So, but they know what it is. So back to romantic suspense. Look at Vanessa's face.
That's breaking news, boys and girls. Breaking news.
So silly. That's all I'm gonna say.
This is what y'all gonna get.
Is
Queen
it
of
that book
Exile.
too?
What a cover.
Queen of Exile comes out in July of this year. This is a story that should be in our history books, but for some reason,
Oh wow, yeah.
it's not, right? So you have a queen during the Regency. who unfortunately they lose the kingdom and she has to rebuild her kingdom or her reign in Europe. And so this, you're going to get everything from the ball gowns to the opulence of the kingdom to the opulence of her rebuilt court in Florence, Italy. It's a sweeping story, and I can't believe that nobody ever wrote about Queen Louise. So, Queen of Exile, historical fiction, guys, not romance, although there may be love story threads in there. It's historical fiction.
Great.
Me, my next one is this one. I talked about it before, and the question about like diversity in terms of publisher came up, and I forgot to say that this art was done by an artist of color. So the focus from Joy Revolution to just be super inclusive with BIPOC creators, artists, editors, and people in marketing.
Awesome.
Part of that company is phenomenal. So yeah,
That is
and this one, like I
awesome.
said, Bridgerton, everybody's comparing to Bridgerton, but Bridgerton meets Count of Monte Cristo with a little dash of the Queen's Gambit. So you got revenge, you got girl coming back to take back her crown, and then, shenanigans. There's a parachute in there too, Diana. So I'm glad you said that earlier. It's a parachute.
I mentioned what I'm writing. It's an Arab American, sort of an heiress, but she's not super rich. An Arab American who inherits a castle, and the Duke, who thinks it's his castle, doesn't realize that his dad has let the entail lapse. And so he decides, in order to save the castle, she's going to open it up to tourists, and because it's in disrepair, and he's not happy, but squints an eye, and he eventually comes to appreciate her in more ways than one.
Well, what I'm working on next is a Vietnamese historical, and it's actually an ancient historical, and it's about two sisters. It's a real legend in Vietnamese history about two sisters who rose up and defeated for a little bit of time the Han Empire at the time, and so it's in progress. It's been in progress for a long time, but I'm actually focusing on it. But I wanted to say this: what's coming out next is Lunar New Year's this weekend, so happy New Year, everyone! And I just have to show off because this is the children's book I released with my children, and it's about it's
amazing.
yeah, so it's called The Year of the Cat, and it's because I was born the year of the cat, and both my twins were as well, and so we wrote the story together, and it's like a a retelling of a famous myth about the New Year's race, and it explains why in Vietnam we celebrate the Year of the Cat, and in China they celebrate the Year of the Rabbit during the same year. So whenever you hear rabbit, also say cat, just to honor the kittens as well.
I love it. I love it.
Awesome.
See, taught me something today. Thank you, babe.
Yeah.
So next for me is the release of Anna Maria and the Fox, which will be out in April. And I start work on the third book already, the third sister's book, very soon, while we're doing revisions on the second sister's book. So I'm all up to here with my sisters. So yeah, that's what I'm working on.
I think I've got both Queen Bee and Anna Maria on Galley. So people, if you read it electronically, there's some e-arcs and things out there. And I got Catch a Raven. I actually got that as a physical arc. So that was pretty cool. So I own that one. That was awesome. Before we go, because we only have a few minutes, but I heard the word cinnamon rolls several times. And I know there's like different kinds of heroes, but what's your favorite type of hero to write then? And like, I mean, I'm a fan of the cinnamon roll plus the nerd because I like that one too. But what's your favorite one to write?
I like the arrogant brash because I like the heroine cutting them off at the knees.
Yep.
I like the alpha hole too.
Yeah.
You said
I
alpha hole?
Alpha
hole.
Han Solo. I like the scoundrel. I like the the smuggler scoundrel.
Yeah, I'm kind of like that. I like the really witty one who uses like humor to deflect from his feelings. and makes you laugh, but you know he's like all soft for the heroine inside. Those are my favorite.
I like to mix it up.
And
I
crunchy
think most of my
cinnamon roll.
heroes are probably alpha, and they're probably, witty, that repartee. But I like to mix it up just to, keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Listen, I like a beta hero I need to boss around, okay?
Do what I say. Damn you.
It's a lie. It's a lie, husband.
I think for your next panel, you guys should do that. Like, we will put out something, and then each of you take a little part, and we write this romance together. Like,
Oh Lord.
using
The hardest thing.
Crazy
I
with
know that
that
would be so much fun to do. Like, we have to
I
do
find
that
writing
next. So
on
when you do
command
part
so
3,
stressful.
I know.
it'll be fun. Part 3,
No,
that's what
I'm
we'll
a-
do.
I'm
We
a-
write
I'm
a
a
romance
fan.
together.
I'm a
Put my
pantser.
put my sweatshirt
Vanessa,
on.
why you hiding? The kind of man you like? Come on. I don't hear you.
Oh,
Why
my
you
kind of
hiding?
man is
Yeah.
a veteran. So he came through some stuff. So you're a veteran,
Mhm.
right? He's witty and an asshole, but he's kind of got some cinnamon.
Some
Right?
cinnamon.
He got a little cinnamon up there,
I love it.
That's my dude.
I love it. Y'all crazy.
Thank you all so much. That was really amazing. I really appreciate you taking all this time with us. I feel like you still do need to do a third panel. Like, there's just so much to cover and to know. You could do this again and it would be different again. Like, it's amazing to me how much you all bring to this table and that we don't know about. Like, this was fantastic. I'm gonna hand it back over to Billy for Bookstore Romance Day. I will be reaching out to all of your publicists to see how we can get you guys through Brainlair Books, whether it's in person or whatever, but we will be doing something for this Bookstore Romance Day as well. So thank you all. That was amazing.
Thank
I
you,
appreciate
Thank you,
Kathy.
it.
You were
Kathy.
awesome.
Thank you.
You were amazing.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Hi guys, this is Billy again. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank all of our authors for being part of this, and I'm not averse to a part 3 if we're all up for it. And thank you to Kathy for moderating. We'll just keep adding authors because let's hope that the pool keeps growing.
Mhm.
And just a reminder, the session has been recorded. Everybody who registered will receive a link to watch the recording, so you can watch this over and over as many times as you like. You can order books from Brainlair Books, and everybody who registered will be entered to win. There are a ton of prizes. We have Libro FM audiobook credits. We have copies of the author's books. There is a $25 bookshop gift card for one lucky person to buy whatever they like. So keep an eye on your email for an email from Bookstore Romance Day in case you're one of the lucky winners. Thank you all for attending and have a great night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Billy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Billy.
Night, everybody.
you.
Night.